Amazon S3 is the storage service that does store the actual EBS volumes. Go ahead and watch this video introducing the simple storage service, or S3. Once you're ready to continue, we'll jump right into defining what the Amazon Simple Storage Service is. So Amazon S3, or Simple Storage Service, is a scalable, highly durable, and secure object storage. So it's organized all your data into objects, all your files into objects, so that allows users to store and retrieve any amount of data from anywhere on the internet. Some of you probably are familiar with cloud drives, right? Google Drive, Dropbox, etc. iCloud, right, is another example of that. Well, S3 works in a similar way, right? Of course, we're putting that more in a compute kind of context. So a lot of the clients accessing this data, the clients requesting this, the objects stored in S3 are going to be applications, right, and other computers. Whereas cloud drives, right, that's really people accessing their own files. So yeah, S3 is a storage service for cloud computing, right? It's a cloud computing solution to store data. So it stores unlimited data, as much as you want. The max single file size is 5 terabytes, but if you want to have 1,000 of these files, Amazon will handle it, right? So imagine trying to handle this amount of data on your on-premises data center. Trying to reach unlimited data storage would be extremely costly upfront. So the advantage of leaning into the AWS cloud, right, is that you have access to these massive data centers, all these computers, right, all this hardware that can store your information with virtually an unlimited capacity. Now, I'm sure, right, there is some kind of limit, right, out there, but they have so much storage available that no one's going to be hitting that limit. Not anytime soon, at least. All right, so durability. So data remains intact and accessible without loss over time. So you can trust that your data will be ready to be requested, accessed, and it won't be lost, even if you store it there for years. And of course, securing your data in case of failures or disasters, that's called redundancy. Redundancy means it's going to be stored in multiple places. So it's not going to be in one single data center in AWS cloud. It's going to be in multiple data centers. So if one of those data centers goes down, AWS is going to have you backed up in another one. So having that confidence of redundancy, of having copies in multiple places, means that you know that your data is going to be secured no matter what. Again, if you had an on-premises data center and there was like a disaster, a fire, I don't know, an earthquake, right? Or maybe your hardware just, got fried. You're kind of screwed, right? You're not going to have another data center, right? You're a single on-premises center. Maybe that's the nature of your organization. But with the AWS cloud, right, you're going to have these multiple copies because you're leading into this massive infrastructure that AWS has set up. You can also manage permissions to that data using the IAM roles. That's what we did in the very first EC2, or sorry, not EC2, in the very first lab where we set up our profile, right? So you can say, hey, this user group has access to this bucket, that user group has access to another bucket. So in that way, you can easily manage who has access to data. And then you can actually set up policies, right? Oh, this person can write to the bucket. That means they can add or change files, right? And this person can only read from the bucket, or this user group can only read from the bucket. So that group is only going to be able to see the files, but not make changes. And then access control lists, you can also use those to control access to bucket data. And notice we're using the word bucket, right? Bucket is just the name for an S3. You can think of it as an instance, right? We have EC2 instances. An S3 instance is usually called a bucket, which kind of makes sense, right? Bucket is something that you put things in. So it does support server-side and client-side encryption for security as well, so you can trust that your data is secured. So what do you mean by object storage? Well, object storage is just a way of organizing the data. Each data or file is called an object, and each object is going to include information. We call that metadata. It's going to have the actual data itself, right? Information on that data, again called metadata, could be like the file name, could be the size, etc. And then it's going to have a unique ID, right, so that you can retrieve it, whether it be from the AWS console, right, or programmatically, right, from another application. So data might be an image, video, text document, really any type of file you want. The metadata is going to have information about what the data is, right? Is it a PDF? Is it a image? How it's used, the object size, and so on, right? The name, upload date, all that stuff is called metadata. And then, of course, it's got to have that unique identifier, that unique ID. So that's going to be the object key. And then, like I mentioned before, in Amazon S3, objects are organized into buckets. So you can think of a bucket almost like a folder, right? Like if you were on Windows or Mac. So this picture didn't load. Let me refresh this real quick. Just hang in there. Sometimes happens. Here we go. So yeah, this is just a little diagram on object storage. As you can see, right, on the right is your actual objects. So for example, we have a picture here. When you zoom into that picture, it's going to have the data, right? The actual picture data, image data, the pixels. And then it's going to have metadata, which is information, file name, the upload date, the file type, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then a key, right? It's going to have a unique identifier. So when you do need to tell AWS, hey, I want to see this image, they know exactly which image it is. Kind of like how we talked about IP addresses, right? Being like the phone book of the internet. Well, with a lot of computing, right, we like to use unique ID so that everything is distinct from itself. So with object storage, we got to have a unique key or address or ID, whatever you want to call it, so that we can locate that image correctly. File correctly, right? It doesn't always have to be an image. So there are different storage classes. So just like we have different types of instances, we have different types of storage classes. They're all going to have different payment rates and options. And each is going to specialize for certain scenarios and situations, right? There's no wrong service in AWS, right? I saw a question about like, oh, is EC2 better than serverless, right? There's no service that's better than another service. It's more about what you specifically need. So with storage classes, it's going to help you get the right service and the right cost for your particular business needs. So when you're selecting an Amazon S3 storage class, there's two main factors you got to think about. It's how often do you plan on retrieving the data? Is that going to be every day, every second? Or is it going to be data that you're only getting like once a month, right? That's going to make a big difference in the class and, of course, in the cost. Of course, more retrieval, right, usually means more cost because that's going to be more API requests to the AWS cloud. And then how available you need your data to be, right? Do you need to access it very quickly? Do you not care, right, how quickly you're able to retrieve that data? So the higher availability, the less downtime the service experiences. That means high availability means that you're going to be able to access your data whenever you want. Downtime means there's going to be certain times of the day or days of the year, right, where this service is going to not be available for you to retrieve your data. So high availability is if you want to have access to your data 24/7. So let's look at the different storage classes that AWS has to offer. Our first is going to be the S3 standard. So this is designed for frequently accessed data. It's for high performance, low latency. Remember, latency is delays. So you're not going to have many delays in getting that data, and then high availability, right? No downtime. Or very, very little downtime. So of course, because we're maximizing all these metrics, it's going to be the highest cost, higher than the other storage classes. It's really good for general purpose storage, a website, an app, analytics, pretty much any application you can think of. 99.99% availability with millisecond latency, and that's single digit milliseconds for fast retrieval. So it's going to get your photos, files, documents, data really, really quickly. It stores data across multiple AZs for durability. Remember, redundancy is important, right? So if you want to have that high availability, having it across multiple AZs is going to make that happen, right? Availability, high availability. Of course, we're going to have multiple AZs. At the minimum, it'll be 3 AZs. So what are the use cases? So websites that are actively being used, like also mobile applications. So if you have a catalog of products, right, on your website, and you have a lot of photos for those products, you want those to be accessible really quickly all the time. You don't want your customers to have any downtime. S3 standard is definitely a good option for you. If you're doing a lot of big data analytics and real-time processing, real-time means that you want it to be instantly happening, then of course S3 standard is going to be a great option for you. Now, let's say you don't access the data quite as much, right? You still want it to be really available and you want it to be retrieved really quickly, but you know that you're not going to be accessing it so much. Maybe it's for a backup and disaster recovery, right? Maybe it's for long-term storage of infrequently used application logs. These are examples. They might not make a lot of sense to us, right? Because we're not running a big organization. But just know it's for cases where you're not accessing or retrieving the data or asking AWS, hey, can I see these files? You're not doing that very often. So this is going to have, again, really high availability, just like the standard service, but it's going to have a lower storage cost because you're expecting not to make as many retrievals, right? So it's still going to be fast retrieval, but the fees are higher if you do retrieve them. So even though the storage cost is lower, every time you do retrieve it, it's going to be higher, right? So again, it's with the expectation that you're not going to be accessing this that frequently. So again, ideal for infrequently accessed data. And it's going to have the same benefits as S3 standard, right? Hence the name S3 standard IA, infrequent access. So you're going to have that data in a minimum of 3 availability zones. Say you want to save even more money. So your data is infrequently accessed. Another way to reduce costs is by reducing the number of zones. So AWS came up with the one zone IA for S3. So it's a lower cost option for infrequent access storage, but stores data in one availability zone, right? So what's that going to mean? That's going to impact your availability, right? It's not going to be as highly available as the standard services. So notice the 0.4% difference, right? Seems small, but it might make a difference, right, for your application. So it's still millisecond retrieval time. One of the dangers, right, is if the AZ fails, the data is going to be lost. So you got to make sure you have that data backed up locally. Maybe it's good for temporary data, but because of that one zone situation, the data is not going to be as resilient. If an AZ goes down, which again does happen, I saw a question right in the discussion. How do things travel across networks, right, without interruptions? The truth is there are interruptions, right? So when you're leaning on something like a cloud, right, and you're leaning on multiple AZs, multiple instances, on all this huge infrastructure, from the point of view of the customer, it seems like there's no interruptions. But of course, right, as we know, there are failures. But when you're running on the cloud, you can kind of move your data across different zones, different data centers, different instances. Once an instance goes down, AWS will be ready to put another one up for your application. So one of the benefits of AWS. But if you do want to save money, if you just want to limit it to one zone, that is an option. But it's a good idea to have secondary backups because AWS might lose your data. And then we have intelligent tiering. So maybe you want to move across the different tiers, right, automatically. Well, AWS offers an S3 storage option for that. So intelligent tiering is going to move between the frequent and infrequent access tiers. So between the standard and the IA, the regular standard, right, and then the standard IA options. So how does it move things automatically? Well, if a particular object or file has not been accessed, a piece of data hasn't been accessed for 30 days, it's going to move it to the S3 standard IA, the infrequent access. It's going to say, oh, nobody's retrieved this for a while, so of course I'm going to move it to the infrequent access. As soon as you retrieve it again, it's going to pop it back into the frequent access, and then wait again those 30 days before it puts it back to IA. So it does require a small monthly monitoring and automation fee per object because it's going to be actively checking, right? So that does cost, right? There is an actual cost for that in terms of computing on the AWS side. So they're going to charge you for that cost of monitoring. So it is ideal for data with unknown or changing access patterns. Maybe some things you'll access frequently, others you won't. Intelligent tiering will handle the correct tiers and the correct storage for you. So it's really good for machine learning data sets. Maybe some sets you'll be using frequently, others you won't. Or data lakes with unknown and or changing access patterns. So again, pretty much anything. Again, you don't have to be an expert, right, on the use cases. Just know intelligent tiering, good if you can't really forecast, right, the actual access tier for every single object. Intelligent tiering, it'll do it for you. All right, now we're moving into the archival data. So that's data that's rarely accessed. That's what we call archival data. So like we have museum archives, right? Museum archives are going to have a lot of things that are stored long term and maybe don't make it to the shelves. But it's so important, right, that those things are protected. Well, it's the same thing with data, right? Archival data, sorry. That you're not going to see it all the time, retrieve it all the time, but you definitely want to make sure that it's safe and secure. So that's where Glacier comes in. So we have S3 Glacier Instant Retrieval, which is a low-cost storage class designed for rarely accessed data that still requires millisecond retrieval times. But again, right, the big distinction from the standard ones is that it's very rarely accessed. So it's the lowest cost storage for archival data that still requires immediate access. Archival data refers to data that's stored long-term with very infrequent access. So there should be like a very in there. So it's still high availability, quick retrieval, but of course, just like the IA, they're going to charge you every time you retrieve it. But the actual cost of storing it over time is significantly lower than the IA. So it's good for medical imaging, scientific data, or long-term storage with fast access needs. So anything that is really important, that it be stored right, that it be secured. Of course, remember the cloud has the benefit of redundancy to make sure that your data isn't lost. But maybe it's data that you're not, requesting that frequently. Maybe that medical imaging, right, that patient or doctor only needs to see it, once a year, for example. We have another option for the archival data, which is the flexible retrieval, different than the instant retrieval. So this is for data that is infrequently accessed, but requires more flexible retrieval options. So this is where you don't really mind waiting a while for your data to load, right? To be able to retrieve it. So the different retrieval speeds, there's expedited, so that's for small files, standard 3 to 5 hours when you're pulling up an entire data set, and then bulk retrieval 5 to 12 hours. So if you're okay with waiting for that data, there's not like a requirement for immediate access, then definitely go with flexible retrieval because you're going to minimize the costs even more. So remember, if you're all those metrics, high speed retrieval, high availability, multiple AZs, you're going to have to pay for that. If you don't need all those, bells and whistles, then, for example, Glacier flexible retrieval is going to be a good option for you because you're not going to have that instant access time. You're sacrificing some of those features, right? But you're definitely minimizing the cost. So it could be for medium priority data archives, such as customer records. Maybe you're doing analysis, right, every so often. You don't really care how long it takes for you to get that data. So you can go definitely with Glacier flexible retrieval if you're okay with waiting for that retrieval. And then we have deep archive. So again, where Glacier is basically anything in the archival data category. This is the lowest cost storage option. So it's for long-term archival data that's rarely accessed. It's the lowest cost among all the S3 storage classes. Just like standard S3, objects are replicated across at least 3 AZs, so you do get that redundancy, but the retrieval time is very, very, very slow. So it can be good for like cold data storage of historical records. So again, you just want to have a copy up on the cloud. You're not really accessing it that many times, but you just want to make sure, right, that it's stored safe in some place, right? And an on-premises data center isn't always a safe place. So having it up on the cloud could be a good idea for your organization. And then we have S3 outposts. Sorry. So S3 outposts extend Amazon S3 storage to on-premises environments. So we've already talked about outposts before. So S3 outposts connect to your AWS outposts and provide some storage options. So it's providing the same API and features as AWS while keeping your data within your actual on-premises data center. So it's going to deliver object storage to your on-premises AWS outposts. It's designed to store data durably and redundantly across multiple devices and servers on your outposts. So again, outposts are for setting up, are connecting AWS technology, right, but to your on-premises center. So this is great, right? If you have to meet certain compliance requirements, maybe you're a government organization and you can't be storing it, publicly on the cloud because it's sensitive data, then of course an outpost could be an option. So use cases, right? Financial, healthcare, government sectors, pretty much anything having compliance requirements. There's some other applications as well, right? It really depends on your organization. It's hard to say, right, exactly which one you need without looking at the individual organization's needs. So go ahead and watch this video comparing EBS and S3.